Hello everyone, I am super excited about this video. Severance is easily my favorite show of the 2020s and excels in being a classic thriller mystery while giving the characters and world a depth that keeps you invested in the plot beyond the mystery alone. There's so much to discuss with the show, so let's get into it. There was some production drama related to a conflict between the showrunners Dan Erickson and Mark Friedman, but they were able to complete filming in April 2024, and now we're going to get the season 2 premiered this Friday, January 17th, 2025. This recaps strategically overview main plot points, but also highlight things that I think might be relevant in season 2, as I don't think that everything that's going to be important in season 2 was exclusively in the last episode of season 1, episode 9. I'm assuming if you're watching this video, you've watched season 1 of Severance already, but you're not willing to rewatch all 9 episodes again. So trust me, I've watched this show 5 times through, so I'll make sure to get the details that you need to know to be most informed for season 2. And if you haven't watched season 1, I hope that you watch this show or watch this recap and are willing to watch the show. I really highly recommend it. I know I'm one of those people who sometimes watch spoiled things in order to kind of get an idea if the show is really for me, if I'm willing to invest that much time in it. So I know those people exist, and if you're one of those people, I hope this video does justice to this phenomenal show. Additionally, I'm going to overview the Lexington papers or letters, which is a supplementary text provided by the creators that explores the tragic story of an innie in Topeka, Kansas, and also provides the instruction guide for the macrodata refiners. So with that being said, there are a lot of defined terms throughout this show that I think are worth going through again. I took some time in between the show. I was obsessed all of 2022 with the show. When the Lexington letters came out, I read them, but I have been lulled on this, and I've had a very, very busy 2023 and 2024. So when I started rewatching it, I realized that there were some defined terms that I don't know. So I'm going to now go through some of those with you. So first, we got Lumen. Lumen is the company at the core of the show, and it is the world's leading pioneer in biotechnology. So that's important to note. This was something that I also got from the Lexington letters, but also in dialogue that was provided in the show itself. We have the Egan family, which founded Lumen in 1866 and continue to control the company today. Keir Egan is the founder of Lumen, and James Egan is the current CEO. And yes, that is James without an S. I looked this through, and actually even in the show, when they go to the perpetuity ring, they do exclude the S. It is just James Egan. All right. So the severance procedure is a procedure by which a chip is inserted into the brain of an individual who will subsequently have spatially dictated memories. The outie is the individual who makes the choice to be severed and contains all the non-lumen memories, while the innie is the individual who's only alive at lumen and exclusively has lumen memories. So they don't experience sleep. They might understand that there's a place called Miami, but if their outie has been to Miami, they don't have any memories of that. They know what it means to fall in love, but they have not experienced that. And so the way that's consistently described throughout the show and in the Lexington letter is that the innie is kind of a baby. They don't have the experience. So just having the knowledge isn't the same thing as having the experience. So I think the show is also making commentary on what it means to be alive and what it means to be an adult, and how babies are really just, and even children have all this knowledge, but because of their lack of their experience, they don't necessarily have the maturity to be considered an adult. Okay, the macrodata refiners, or the MDR department, that's the primary department we're focused on, and they found numbers into 5 bins based on the emotions elicited, and according to the Lexington letter, they are chosen for their intuition and emotional intelligence. And these 5 bins that they're putting their numbers are into, they also correspond with the 4 tempers, which I'll talk in the next slide. And then we have the optics and design team. The only other lumen department explored in the show, where it's not clear exactly what they do, but we know they're involved in sort of, again, optics. They store and hang the paintings, and they print products on 3D printers. So now let's get into other facts. We have the break room. This is the punishment for innies, where their heart rate is monitored, and then they're made to repeat a phrase until there's a determination that the any is sorry. So this is the phrase that they're told to repeat. We also understand that they could be saying this up to 1,000 times and more, but the phrase is, forgive me for the harm I have caused this world. None may atone for my actions but me, and only in me shall their stain live on. I am thankful to have been caught, my fall cut short by those with wizened hands. All I can be is sorry, and that's all that I am. And they have to repeat this over and over again until a heart monitor reflects that they are quote unquote sorry. So then you also have wellness sessions that are conducted in the show by Miss Casey, where she tells the inner information about their outie to brighten the innie spirit. They must enjoy each fact equally, and if they do express any sort of preference or seeming emotional outbursts about one fact over another, they get deducted points, and if they get deducted 100 points, then their session is ended. You have the 4 tempers. These are very important. They're woe, frolic, dread, and malice, and they correspond again to the bins that the micro data refiners use. Keir believed that control of the tempers meant that you can control the world. So this is something interesting to put into context. And this picture that we have here is actually the picture that both Irv and Burr really like, but it's a picture of basically Keir whipping the 4 tempers. So these are the 4 tempers of woe, frolic, dread, and malice. So he believed that he can control them, and if you control them, you control the world. And then you have Luhmann's 9 core principles, which is vision, verb, wit, cheer, humility, benevolence, nimbleness, probity, and wiles. Again, these are very important for imagery that we see towards the end of the season. And again, I suspect that they will come up again. And then the code detectors are in the Luhmann end of elevators, and they detect when innies or outies try to communicate with each other. All right, so let's get into the recap. There's a lot that happens in the show, so bear with me and my fast talking. Unfortunately, I realized, at first I was like, I talk so fast, and I am trying to work on that. But also, you could slow it down if I talk too fast for you. I usually speed up people's videos, but I guess I'm one of those people that if you truly can't catch what I'm saying, you could slow it down. So before I get into going into each episode, overall, this is my belief. Season 1 is actually about a gradual disillusionment with the innies. In another video, I'm going to explain my theory that Severance has a relationship with Max Weber's theories on Protestantism and capitalism. So Max Weber was one of those German people, and there was a time in the early 20th century where Europeans were obsessed with Americans. They're like, how did they do that, right? A former colony become this massive global juggernaut. And one of the theories that Weber came up with is that there is a Protestant work ethic that was vital to how America's capitalist country became as powerful as it did. So I think that's a part of it. So let's get into episode 1. Good news about hell. So we meet Mark S., who has become department head of Luhmann's macro data refinement department after his office best friend, Petey, has left. Luhmann's administrators, Harmony Cobell and Mr. Milchek, are the ones to inform Mark of his promotion. One of Mark's first tasks as department head is to oversee the orientation of a new employee, Helly. And here we see her, she's just on the table. That's how the show opens. Helly is very reluctant to acquiesce to the conditions she's subject to, and we learn more about the severance procedure. Helly watches a video of her outie tell her that she voluntarily undertook the severance procedure and that any Helly must work at Luhmann. Here we get the first evidence that agency is a key theme of the show, since any Helly is completely against working in Luhmann, while her outie is adamant that this is what is best for them. We are then introduced to outie Mark Scout, who is clearly depressed. He has a neighbor named Mrs. Selvig who puts her trash out bin on the wrong day, and they get a little bit of a confrontation there. His pregnant sister, Devin, picks Mark up for dinner without food at their home. So this is one of the funnier aspects of the show is Devin and her husband, Rickon, who is a boisterous faux intellectual with equally obnoxious friends. I will say when I was watching season 1, and I think another reviewer made this comment, I did not understand why Rickon was with Devin. But because the show is so good, I don't really care. They are one of the most entertaining parts of the entire show. We find out that Mark was a history professor of World War I until his wife, Gemma, died in a car accident. Gemma was also an educator, but in Russian literature, not psychology. This is important to note. She was a Russian literature professor, nothing to do with psychology. After the accident, Mark had difficulty returning to teaching and severed, and he believes that he works in a department at Lumen that archives Lumen's history. We learned from the other guests that there is a broad-based criticism of the severance procedure, since many people see the procedure as abusive to the innies and potentially criminally invasive, since the outies, the workers, don't actually know what they're doing within Lumen. At a solo dinner, which is paid for by a voucher provided by Lumen, because while Mark was giving an orientation to Ellie, she threw something at his head, so he was bleeding on his head. Petey confronts outie Mark and reveals that he's a Lumen coworker who has reintegrated his mind, meaning he contains both memories of his innie and outie at the same time. He reveals that both he and Mark filed complaints at Lumen, but the complaints were never addressed. Petey leaves Mark with an address to meet him if he would like to discuss his time at Lumen further. We see that Mrs. Selvig is Miss Harmony Cobell. They are the same person. And we get this kind of really cool contrast because when we're introduced to Miss Harmony Cobell at Lumen, she says that her mother was atheist. And then as Miss Selvig on the outside, she says that her mother's Catholic. So she's clearly playing these two characters. She's really nice and sweet as Mrs. Selvig, and she's basically abusive while in Lumen. And then we also get at the end of episode 1, the innies having melon parties to celebrate Mark's promotion and Helly joining the team. And so we get some indication that they're being treated like children. All right. Episode 2, Half Loop. We open in the scene with outie Helly undergoing the severance procedure. And we see a lot of pictures being taken by Milchek. So this is our first hint that Helly is a little different, but a lot of pictures are always being taken of Helly and the entire MDR team. And we'll see how that plays in later in the show. Helly is struggling to assimilate. We learn that Helly runs into the stairwell and her outie is activated. And Milchek assures the outie that everything is going fine, but this is just a technique to prove to Helly R, the innie, that there is no escape, because she only has memories of pushing the door out and then coming back in without necessarily her doing so. It's because her outie is going back into the building. In a team building session, Irv says that he has memorized the 9 core Lumen principle, and Mark reveals to Milchek that he broke protocol by removing the team photos containing Petey. Milchek asks Mark why Mark didn't have the same reaction to Carol D when she left the department, and Mark points out that there was notice for Carol D's departure, whereas nothing was provided for Petey's departure. So in the middle of taking new team photos, Helly declares she quits by writing "I quit" on a post-it and goes to the elevator. However, the detector set off and the security, Mr. Grainer, handles the situation. Mr. Grainer intends to send Helly to the break room, but Mark saves Helly and goes to the break room in her stead. Outie Mark goes on a date with his sister's midwife, Alexa, and after a middling date, Mark confronts the Whole Mind Collective protesters. So the Whole Mind Collective are these public protesters who are very much against severance. You see a picture there. It says severance robs the worker of the moral self-governance. So again, there is a widespread anti-severance sentiment within the world. The next day, Mark calls in sick and he goes to visits Petey at the provided address. Petey claims the innies are being abused in Lumen and provides a recording of what happens in the break room. Mark feels bad about Petey living in a greenhouse and invites Petey to live with him at his house. At Lumen, we learn more about the work that macro data refiners do. We learn that they are supposed to file numbers based on how they make the individual feel. They are awarded based on how much they file, including getting finger traps, erasers, character drawings, and even a waffle party. Irving begins hallucinating black goo seeping out of the Lumen machine as he falls asleep. Irving is docked pay for sleeping at his desk and sent to a session with Miss Casey, where she conducts a wellness session. While waiting for his wellness session, Irving admires a painting and crosses and meets Bert. This is where they first meet. Helly then files her first numbers, and the episode ends with a reintegration sick Petey. And now to episode 3, In Perpetuity. PD tells Marks about a department that doesn't get to leave at the end of the workday. PD says that he could see the hurt and pain in Mark that he carried from the outside, but he could never identify it since they didn't know what they were going through in the outside world. While Mark is watching TV, we hear cable television pundits, which include Natalie, who we'll see later, who's the Lumen PR, argue about a situation where a Lumen employee got pregnant by a fellow Lumen employee as they were severed. So this is a really important anecdote, I feel, because this is a clear moral consideration, because we don't know whether the relationship that got this woman pregnant was consensual, right? That's a core aspect of knowing what happens when you're going to work, is that somebody's able to recall whether it's consensual or not. And it was clearly a big issue, but I just want to point it out because it was kind of a small scene, but I think very significant to tell about how serious things can get and how bad things can get in the severed floor. So while then we see that Petey gets a flashback about being at INI, and it's clear that reintegration is flawed. Helly submits a resignation request and believes she won't be working at Lumen for very long. Irving suggests that they show Helly the perpetuity wing, because that will give her the meaning of working at Lumen. When Mark passes the suggestion on to Cobell, she throws a mug at him, showing a distinction between the Harmony Cobell that we meet in Lumen and the Mrs. Selvig we meet on the outside. As they make their way to the perpetuity wing, they pass by Bert and Felicia of the O&D department. Dylan immediately shows hostility to O&D, stating that they started an uprising and are antagonistic to MDR department. Dylan says that departments are determined by their makeup of tempers and the ratios that they contain. At the Perpetuity Wing, we learned that there have been 8 leaders of Lumen since its founding in 1866. All CEOs are descendants of the founder, Keir Egan, and all of them are, of course, members of the Egan family. We learned that one of the Lumen CEOs, Ambrose, was considered a black sheep. So that might come up because there seems to be goat sheep things happening, and Ambrose was considered a black sheep. Harmony Cobell is confronted by the Lumen board and Natalie, who are frustrated by Harmony's inability to locate Petey, who has gone off the grid. When Harmony suggests that Petey has been reintegrated, the board completely rejects the suggestion, claiming that reintegration is impossible. So we learned that Keir believed that the human soul is composed of some ratio of 4 tempers: woe, frolic, dread, and malice. Keir believed that the ability to control the 4 tempers gives anyone the ability to control the world. These are the same categories that are used to bin and file the numbers for the macro data refiners. Okay. While they're touring a replica of Keir's house, Helly runs away and tries to get a paper claiming her resignation to the Audi. In her attempt to escape, Helly suffers a cut on her wrist. Helly is forced to go to the break room, where Milchek forces her to repeat the phrase that is repeated in the break room. The INI Mark switches out the team photos, but on this mission, he finds a map of Lumen, which is what Petey had told was going to be there. He had made a map of Lumen. In the Audi world, Mark returns home and sees that Petey is no longer there. Mark follows an ambulance to find Petey lost consciousness at a local gas station. Back home, Mark cleans up and finds his cell phone Petey left behind. Episode 4, The UUR. Helly is still in the break room, and we see how for the innies, they never experience the time between work, so they technically are always at work, which means that Helly never gets a break from the break room. Innie Mark is trying to figure out what to do with Petey's map. Bert visits the MDR department to provide them with the totes he's been working on and invite them on a tour of the OD department. Irving takes Bert up on his offer and they examine the paintings that Irving likes. While looking at a painting, Bert puts his hand over Bert's. Irving excuses himself, and on his way back to MDR, he finds Ricken's book, The UUR, which Harmony pilfered to conduct research on Mark. Innie Mark finds a message left for him in the Ricken book, and Irving brings Mark to determine what they should do with the book, but Irving simply stores it in his drawers without informing Milchek. During a break, Dylan and Helly discuss the break room, where Helly describes hearing a muffling voice of an angry man, and Dylan hears a crying baby. So there is this idea and this wonder, I thought, when I went and rewatched that scene several times, whether or not both of them were hearing parts of their outie life. Like, as they're starting to get really tired and basically, out of sorts during the break room, that they're starting to hear aspects of their real outie life. During the break deal, Mark shreds the PD's Lumen map. He's basically saying, no, I'm going to keep the party line. That won't last long. And while everyone is distracted by Rickon's book, Helly finds a paper cutter and forces Harmony to allow her to record a video for Audi to plead her case for resignation. The following day at work, Helly gives Helly a video indicating that she will not accept the resignation and she will regret trying to cut off a finger. Helly tells Helly that she has to accept reality. On the outside, Devin, Mark's sister, tells Mark about the birthing cabin where she'll deliver her baby, and Mike finds out through the news that Petey has died. We learn that Harmony needs to retrieve Petey's chip. Mark attends Petey's funeral, where Mrs. Selvig / Harmony Cobell is also in attendance. He has a terse conversation with Petey's ex-wife and daughter, Nina and June, and those are their names respectively. Harmony is able to retrieve Petey's chip. Grainer, the security guard at Loomer, takes Petey's chip to a diagnostic to determine who reintegrated him. Harmony's request that Miss Casey run a special session with Mark. Otherwise, in the meantime, Mark continues to read the UUR and increasingly builds his individuality and perception of his place within Lumen. Irving sneaks to OD and realizes that Bert has lied about the size of his office, as there are definitely more than 2 people working in OD. At her wit's end, Helly decides to use an electrical extension cord to hang herself in an elevator with the intention to catch her Audie's attention, because clearly nothing is working. So, episode 5, The Grim Barbarity of Optics and Design. This is a really depressing episode as it begins with a Helly who is being removed from the elevator after she hangs herself. The chip diagnostic confirms that Petey was reintegrated, and Harmony sends Grainer on a mission to determine who reintegrated Petey. Devin delivers her baby with the help of Alexa. And we find that just before the delivery, Devin had met a woman in the neighboring cabin who allows her to get coffee, and her name was Gabby. After the delivery, Mark reveals that he believes Lumen is up to something shady. He reveals that to Devin. So Mark is starting to tell Devin that he thinks not everything isn't on the up and up. On her first day back at work, Helly is observed by Miss Casey. Irving hallucinates again and decides to visit Bert in OD. While attempting to print a map with directions to OD, Irving prints a painting depicting a coup by OD against MDR. The printing was done intentionally by Milchuk to discourage interdepartment fraternizing. Miss Casey has to leave to do distribution supply, and Mark and Helly use this as an opportunity to recreate Petey's map. Meanwhile, Irv and Dylan find Bert in a conference room where Dylan locks Bert in because of concerns about the coup. Bert explains that he lied about the size of his department because there were also rumors within OD that MDR has attacking larvae. Okay, so Bert invites Dylan and Irv to come to the OD department, and Dylan finds a painting of the coup, except this painting that he finds in OD, it's painted to show MDR as the attacker. So they're starting to catch on that maybe there isn't really truth to either of these stories, since depending on which department you are, you have different attackers and different victims. Helly and Mark are trying to recreate the map, and they come across a room of a man nursing baby goats and saying they aren't ready. It isn't time. Miss Casey finds Mark and Helly and escorts them back to MDR. Bert introduces the entire MDR team to OD, where we see them with 3D machines printing different products. All right, episode 6, Hide and Seek. We open with Harmony at home making a bead bracelet. We see she lives an ascetic lifestyle and has a Kier shrine in her home, which includes a school picture of the Myrtle Egan School for Girls and a hospital bracelet for a Charlotte Cobell with a breathing tube. So this was, I remember when this episode came out and everyone on Reddit and Twitter was going crazy about this. I'll talk more about my theory in another video, but I don't think it is as deep as people are making it out to seem. But again, we'll get more into that later. At Lumen, Irv and Bert meet up in a secret greenhouse place. Irv is not ready to kiss yet, but they do touch foreheads against each other. This was a very touching scene. In Outie World, Devin is taking a walk and bumps into Gabby, who she met at the birthing cabins. Gabby does not recognize her and introduces her husband, Angelo Arteta, who we find out later is a state senator. And he is a massive supporter of Severance. In a conversation between Innie, Mark, and Mrs. Selvig, we learn that Miss Casey is a permanent Innie and has been sent to the break room as a result of the adventures taken by MDR while she was observing. And excuse me, I mentioned her as Miss Selvig, but in this context, when she's at Lumen, she is Harmony Cobell. So my apologies for that. As a result of the protocol breaking behavior, MDR has their hallway privilege revoked. Mark immediately does not follow that rule and takes the MDR team on a trip to meet the entire OD team, where we again see the 3D machines, where they talk about making watering cans and even having made hatchets the prior week. MDR tells OD about the baby goats, and OD knows nothing about that department. Mark suggests that they work together to solve the mystery of Lumen. Right before MDR is caught by Milchek, Dylan is able to snatch an ideographic card from OD. Mark gets sent to the break room as a result of his action. In the long break room hallway, Mark passes Miss Casey and apologizes. Outie Mark has been given another chance at a date with Alexa, even though, again, to me, they did not seem like a good match, but they actually do well this time. They commiserate about how Devin is looking for a lactation expert to help her latch with her infant, and we also see that Mrs. Selvig has decided to put her hat in the ring to become that lactation expert. Alexa and Mark's date ends at his house, so it was successful. We then jump to a scene, which is our only scene with Outie Dylan, because Milchek has initiated the overtime contingency, or OTC, which allows Lumen to turn the innies on outside of the basement. Milchek needs to know where the ideographic card is. Before Innie Dylan is turned off by Milchek, he finds out that he has a child who comes to the closet and hugs him. In the middle of the night, Mark wakes up and retrieves Petey's phone, which he threw away. He answers a call, and a female voice on the other end answers and tells him to meet her at the university, Gaines University. And we finally end the episode with the image of metal doors of the MDR being closed so that they could be locked into their department. Okay. Episode 7, Defiant Jazz. We meet Regebi at the university, who never confirms her identity, but we can infer from prior information about how Harmony Cobell talks about her being the only one capable of the reintegration procedure. From what we know, Regebi is a scientist who used to work for Lumen and even put the chip in Mark's head. She said that she was the one who did that. So she seems to be integral in the development of the chip and regrets her participation in the morally unsound practice. She now works to help integrate the severed, but she does mention again that Petey is the first person she reintegrated and that he did not listen to her when it came to how he should handle reintegration sickness. So she explicitly describes the innies as babies and says that Mark Innie at only 2 years old is just a baby. Again, something very important to keep in mind. Grainer finds both Mark and Regebi, but Regebi is able to beat Grainer with a bat and he clearly dies. And Regebi tells Mark to take Grainer's security card and that his innie will know what to do with it. Mark returns home where he's very anxious and high on adrenaline, takes off his clothes, but guess who's still at home because they went on a date? Alexa. And they have this awkward conversation where he implies that she should leave. So they were going well, but it seems like things are just not going the way that Alexa thought they should be. Mark throws his trash away, which Miss Selvig notices because it is out of his habit to throw it out at that time of day. Mark brings Grainer's card to Lumen. At Lumen, Milchek explains to Dylan the overtime contingency and warns about telling anyone else, including Miss Cobell, making it clear that Milchek engaged in unauthorized activity. Milchek then explains to the entire MDR team that there are new protocols, which includes them being locked into their department. Because Helly got through 75% of the file, she wins a music dance experience, and she, of course, chooses Defiant Jazz. Everyone except for Dylan participates in the dance. Dylan is upset about learning about the existence of his son, and in an anger, bites Milchek's arm, which breaks skin. This is really funny scene. Milchek says, "You broke skin." So the music dance experience is concluded, and Milchek cannot report Dylan to Mrs. Cobell because of that overtime contingency that was unauthorized. Dylan then tells the rest of the MDR team about the overtime contingency, and Mark reveals that he has Grainer's security card, but he doesn't have no idea why his Audi has it. The MDR team makes a plan to find the security office and determine how to activate the overtime contingency. Irv breaks from the plan because he wants to go talk to his lover, Bert. So it's only Helly and Mark searching for the security office while Dylan keeps it down in MDR. So Cobell also almost finds the group, but is interrupted by Natalie, again the PR lady from Lumen, and the board, who tell her that Grainer is dead. Okay, Cobell further insists that reintegration is possible, and the board gives her an opportunity to prove her claim at the upcoming Egan family gala. Meanwhile, Irv finds Bert. But he discovers that Bert is retiring. This is a reminder that retirement for Innies means death, because they only live at Lumen. They only have memories in Lumen, so if you're going to be retired, you are dying, essentially. Milchek then arrives with some video, but Irv goes off on Milchek, calling Milchek a motherfucker with the privilege of memory. Bert is able to calm Irv down, and Irv is allowed to stay for the remainder of Bert's retirement party. When Irv reunites with the MDR team, he affirms his desire to quote-unquote burn Lumen to the ground. In Audi World, Mrs. Selvig has been selected as Devin lactation specialist, and they start to become close. Alexa comes to Mark's home to retrieve her forgotten phone, and they have a conversation about Mark's ex-wife, because Mark, in a drunken state, believes that the reason why Alexa is turned off from Mark is because of his conversation about the ex-wife, but that's not it. He's just a general weirdo, and he rips up a picture of his ex-wife to show her that he's not worried about her anymore. But when he starts putting it together, we start to realize that Miss Casey is Gemma, Mark's ex-wife. So that is one of the biggest mysteries that season 2 will tackle, or probably won't. We don't know. Anyway, for the first time, we meet Irv's Audi, who is walking with a dog who he has named Radar. We learn that Irv is a painter, which explains Irv's goo hallucinations while at Lumen. We also find out later that what Irv is painting is the elevator where the permanent Innies are going down. So there's this elevator shaft, but the elevator is going down, while Innies, who are normal Innies like the MDR team, they only see an elevator going up because they're going back to the Audi world. But the permanent Innies never see the outside world. At Lumen, Helen is anxiously trying to complete her filing assignment. When she finishes her file, a Kier cartoon tells Helly that he loves her. We assume that this is a cartoon that all refiners get upon completion, because the rest of the team did not say anything about that. Because, again, what we learn at the end of episode 9 might make it seem like this is personal. In a meeting with Harmony, Dylan is told, Mark tells Harmony that Dylan will be the one receiving the waffle party. Harmony schedules a wellness session for Mark that will be conducted by Miss Casey. At the wellness session, Miss Casey informs Dylan that she has been fired. We also learn that Miss Casey has only been alive for around 107 hours, and the vast majority of her life was wellness sessions. The most excitement she has had was observing Helly's for the 8 hours in the MDR, because this was her only time alive outside of the wellness session. Cobell is observing this entire session, and she seems disappointed, and Milchek reminds her that it is a good thing that they don't remember each other. So this is kind of a hint at potentially Mrs. Cobell's ulterior motive. She wants to see these people potentially remember each other. Miss Casey makes her way to the elevator for the permanent Innies. This is a really sad scene where she asks Milchek, "Is my person upstairs happy?" But there is no person upstairs. She's dead in the outer world. But we also recognize that this is the elevator shaft here pictured that Irv is drawing. So the other question is, why does Irv know what the permanent Innies look like? Why does he know about this elevator shaft? At the end of the day, the team confirms their plan to have Dylan remain in the office after the waffle party to turn on the overtime contingency, while the other team 3 members are able to tell people about what's going on with them inside Lumen. We also get that Cobell is fired because the board finds out that Helly attempted suicide and she's escorted off of Lumen premises. So before the entire MDR team leaves, we see that Helly and Mark kiss. So there is romantic vibes going on there. Dylan is escorted to the waffle party, which is one of the weirdest things that I've ever seen, but it is in the perpetuity wing in Kier's replica house. After eating the waffles, Dylan is placed on Kier's bed and he has to put on this giant Kier head. There are also 9 whips on the bed, which represent the 9 Lumen core principles, and then the 4 dancers in giant mask representing the Tempers also come in and dance. But before they finish their dance, Dylan escapes and goes to the security room. While they're driving away from Lumen, we see Miss Cobell scream about fuck her. We don't know who the her is. A part of me thinks maybe she's just saying fuck Helena Egan. We might need season 2 to see what the relationship between Helena Egan is with Miss Cobell, but yeah, she's saying fuck her. She's mad at somebody, a woman that we are not really sure who it is, about this decision for her of getting fired. And in the Audi world, Rickon is hosting a book launching party, which Mark attends. And not only who's also in attendance is Mrs. Selvig, and Mark lets Selvig know that he's thinking about quitting Lumen. And so we get into the final episode of season 1, the We Are. This is a crazy episode. So the overtime contingency is activated. We find Irv painting in his house. Helly is at a gala, and Mark is at Rickon's book launch. We learn that Helly R is Helena Egan. She has an elevator conversation with Gabby Arteta, who confirms that she uses Severance to deliver her babies. We then learn that Helena Egan underwent Severance for a PR stunt. Her father is the CEO, James Egan, who has a conversation with her and is proud of her sacrifice. Mark is awakened while hugging Mrs. Selvig and is obviously tense and hesitant at her presence in the Audi world because, of course, any Mark only knows Harmony Cobell and not the kind and nice Mrs. Selvig. Mark also discovers Rickon is his brother-in-law and that his sister has a baby. Cobell can already sense, however, that something is off with Mark. Irv searches his home and he finds a box with Navy items, implying that he has served in the Navy. The box has a false bottom, which reveals a collection of articles about severed individuals suing Lumen for damages. He also has a list of severed individuals and their addresses, and is able to find Bert's name and address on the list. We learned that they live in a city named Kier in PE. I thought I was going crazy because I was like, I think Pennsylvania is only the P state. But yeah, there's no state PE. The only thing I got was, of course, a province in Canada, Prince Edward's Island. So I don't know what this is, but yeah, that will be interesting because we'll see in the Lexington letters. And we also saw on the show that they refer to American states. So this is America. We have all the states, but I don't know what Kier PE is. Anyway, Mark finally is able to talk to his sister about his situation because Miss Selvig is able to take care of the new baby. However, unfortunately, Mark reveals himself when, on his way to talk to his sister, he calls Mrs. Selvig Cobell. And so Cobell immediately knows that it is any Mark. She gets into her car and goes to Lumen while calling Milchick and letting him know that the MDR team has activated the overtime contingency. Mark tells his sister everything, but then they realize that Cobell has the baby, and Cobell / Mrs. Selvig actually is the one who works for Lumen. And so they start to freak out because they cannot find the baby, and they learn that Miss Selvig has left. Helly is about to give a speech at the gala when Cobell confronts her and reminds her that while the Audis will be fine, and especially Helena Egan, the innies will suffer a great pain as a result of their action. Helly ignores Cobell, and she lets the gala attendees know that the innies are tortured and miserable. Milchick cuts through Dylan's belt lock and they end the OTC, but before then, we see that Irv has found Bert, but unfortunately, it looks like Bert is already in a relationship. We just see an absolutely crushed Irv try to go to the door, but he's not able to actually talk to Audi Bert as any Irving. We also see that Mark finds a picture of Gemma, Mrs. Casey, and he's able to tell the party goers she's alive. That's the only thing that they get out. I'm hoping Devin, unfortunately, they're all really stressed about finding the baby, so maybe they weren't listening, but I hope somebody was listening and makes the connection that when any Mark says she's alive, they understand that it is Miss Casey, but we do not know. But the episode ends there, and that is what will likely go into season 2. I have a lot of questions for season 2. Like, can they erase the memories of the innies? Because at this point, like, how are you going to work with innies that have experienced all this? I don't know. This is going to be a wild season. I'll talk more about what questions we need answered in another video that I will hopefully have released before Friday. But there's so much to be talked about with the show. But again, I'm trying to keep it to recap so that I don't overrun this whole episode. But let's get into the Lexington Letters. For those of you who don't know, on Apple Books, basically Apple released a supplement called the Lexington Letter, and let me go into what that is. Okay, the Lexington Letter tells the story of Peg Kincaid and her innie Peggy K. Peg is a severed individual out of Topeka, Kansas. She was a school bus driver until there was an accident that left her stranded with kids for 2 hours, and then she was forced to stay on with the bus for several hours after the children left. Moreover, once all the fiasco was done, she was yelled at by her boss because he thought that she caused the incident. While she was waiting in the bus, she learns about an opportunity at Lumen. Despite not graduating college, she's offered a job at Lumen for 4 times her bus driver's salary. This is super important because I think that we know that Mark was a history professor, but we don't know what the qualifications for everybody else in MDR was. So it's clear that they're not necessarily looking for somebody who has traditional education qualification. So all she needed to do was undergo the severance procedure, which for her at that time after that accident with the bus, she assumed was a positive perk. It's interesting to note that at the Kansas office, the Audis actually had to change into a specific uniform before descending down into the elevator. One day, while working for Lumen, she receives a note from her innie. The note bypasses the code detector because it is written in a secret language developed by Peg and her sister when she was young, and that language is called Puglish. So it's just a bunch of symbols that don't really mean anything, so maybe they just thought the innie was crazy because the detectors did not figure it out. The innie and Audi Peg begin a consistent correspondence telling each other about their respective lives. Peg describes talking to her innie as talking to her child self. Peg reinforces the confusion about the work the refiners do, especially considering that, again, she's getting paid 4 times as much as she did as a bus driver, but the job that innie Peggy seems to do seems simple and basically non-consequential. So the innie is really excited about completing a file called Lexington, which is described as complicated and exhausting. However, Audi Peg realizes that the date and time of the completion of the Lexington file coincides with the time of the Dorner truck explosion. So Dorner is a competitor to Lumen. A total of 6 people die in this explosion, and Dorner explains that a prototype for one of their devices had been destroyed in the explosion. Audi Peg thinks that innie Peggy's filing has to do with the explosion, and she implores innie Peggy to stop her filing. After that message is sent, communication completely stops until one day the code detectors are broken and innie Peggy is able to smuggle her Audi the macro data refinement orientation booklet. The booklet makes clear that they have no intention of telling the innies what the numbers mean because it could, quote, inhibit their natural intuition. After a week of no communication, Audi Peggy tries to send a note just asking, "How are you? Are you okay?" Excuse me. But after only 10 minutes, she's rushed back upstairs with a note in her mouth from innie Peggy that says she needs to run away and that Lumen is going to try to follow her. Audi Peg immediately quits Lumen and then she goes on the run. In the email correspondence, we learned that the editor contacted someone at Lumen about this email, so clearly we know that's a bust. And the editor then says that the Lumen source says that Peg was fired for having too many absences. So while Peg is saying, I was fired because, or I quit because things were seeming really weird, it seems like my innie was basically help facilitating terrorist acts. Lumen is saying that no, she was fired. A day after Peg's email, the editor confirms that Peg is dead from a quote-unquote car accident. So interesting, because guess who also died in a car accident? Gemma. So they say that Peg is dead from a car accident, and affirms that filing a story like this could lead to a libel suit. We also get intel that Lumen has previously sued another publication into oblivion. So the writer that was on this was Daria Thorne. She's a journalist from Topeka Star. So I wonder if she'll show up in season 2. Who knows? But I feel like, considering all the work that, the creators of of Severance did for this letter, I assume that Daria Thorne might show up in season 2. Again, remember that we had 3 years from season 1 to season 2, so this might be something that was kind of a part of the development for season 2, but because it was taking so long, they just threw this at us to help give us an idea of where the show might be going. So in addition to the letter and the email correspondence, we also get the Macro Data Refiner's orientation booklet. So it's really cool. Basically, it affirms that the effects of severance are permanent, or maybe it's not. Regardless, that's what they say in the booklet. Regebi seems to want to do something different. The refiner is defined as someone who makes something pure, more usable and more accessible in a wide range of industries, from oil, sugar, and biotechnologies. So basically, these refiners are supposed to make things pure in any sort of industry. And I think, yeah, that's interesting, considering especially the idea that maybe Peggy was helping in this terrorist act. So how is she able to be pure? But also, again, the booklet reinforces that macrodata refiners are chosen because of their intuition and emotional intelligence. So we understand that there are 4 categories, which corresponds with the 4 tempers, which again, I'll remind you that Keir said the control of the 4 tempers means control of the world. So what's interesting or confusing to me is that they have 4 categories to file the numbers into, but they have 5 bins. So I was confused by that, because 4 categories but 5 bins, what's the 5th bin for? I don't know. But either way, we have the woe category, which is melancholy or despair. We have FC, which is joy, gaiety, or ecstasy. We have DR, which is fear, anxiety, or apprehension. And then we have MA, which is rage or desire to do harm. So these are the 4 things that they put things into. I just remember that really funny scene where Helly's like, I feel scared. Like, she was being genuine. Like, she actually feels scared. It was so funny. Yeah, that was definitely 3DR, fear, anxiety, and apprehension. But yeah, it was interesting because also Dylan would say, you can't, like, you're just going to know it. You're just going to feel it. So this idea that they're being chosen for their intuition and emotional intelligence also comes back to that fact of maybe they just have this strong intuition that they're choosing from. And again, there's no like educational qualification that is making them these macro data refiners. So if they file the numbers wrong, they get a thumbs down. So this is also really important, because you would think that if this is all about intuition, then there's no such thing as wrong filing, but apparently there is, and you will get a thumbs down. So you can't just bullshit your way through refining. They also have an office dress code, which requires monochromatic and solid colors. The innies must be dressed in black, white, gray, navy, gray, and pastels. And this was confirmed. I didn't see anybody deviating for these colors. Although I would say, like, black, white, navy, gray, and pastels, I feel like that's most office people. That's I've never seen I guess maybe there, you know what, there are floral. I definitely am a floral girly. I do that at times. But yeah, you don't see busy patterns at all with any of these refiners. So yeah, they do have a dress code, but it's interesting. I wonder if the reason why the Topeka office had them actually change into different clothing was just because of the environment, or if this was how early this was in relation to the current the story within Severance. Who knows? So they also have this thing, and I just thought it was interesting. Employees must wash their hands at least 10 times a day before and after eating. and they must do it before and after eating, using the bathroom, after using the bathroom, and then when they come in contact with the coworker. That definitely doesn't happen. But again, I think it's this way, and again, cults do this a lot, where you control really random and small things in somebody's life, and it just kind of, first of all, it lets the leader know whether or not somebody is really following the rules. And Irv is a really good example of this, right? He follows the rules to a religious extent, and so it makes him the perfect person to control, or at least they thought, until he fell in love with Bert. So yeah, I just thought that was interesting that they have to wash their hands 10 times a day. And then they restrict inter-department fraternization under the guise of keeping employees healthy from illnesses. So they're saying you can't fraternize because you can't get sick. In a post-COVID world, that kind of makes sense, but no, it's, again, a desire to control. So that's that. This was a long video, but I hope it helps with a subsequent video I'm going to be making about Protestantism and capitalism, which Mark Weber may get a whole theory on. And until then, thank you so much for watching this video. I'm so excited to become a Severance junkie come the 17th. Trust, you will see that all I will be talking about is Severance. I'm so excited it's back. Until next time, this was Strategic Delusion. I almost forgot my name. Thank you.